Gracie Jiu-Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 149 of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. Today, my guest will be the legendary wrestler Mark Schultz, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, let's start with our quote. And that is, "Discipline and consistency. I owe these two factors all I have attained in my life. Things have never happened overnight. Results have appeared as a consequence of decades-long toil. It is necessary to persist." And that is from Master Carlos Gracie Jr. All right, Mark Schultz is an American Olympian and two-time world champion freestyle wrestler and a distinguished member of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, the San Jose Sports Hall of Fame, the California Wrestling Hall of Fame, and the San Mateo Peninsula Sports Hall of Fame. He and his late older brother Dave Schultz, also a wrestler, were noted for both winning gold medals in wrestling in the same Olympics in 1984. They are the only American brothers to win both world and Olympic gold. They won more NCAA, U.S. Open, world, and Olympic titles than any other American brother combination in history. In this episode, he discusses his start in wrestling, his collegiate days, why he purposely threw the last match of the 1988 Olympics, the Foxcatcher movie, and why he didn't like it, his book, Foxcatcher and the Real Story of Foxcatcher, his epic match with Rickson Gracie, how he got into UFC 9, why he only fought in one UFC, his account of Pedro Sauer's epic fight against Lance Batchelor, what he learned from and his relationship with Master Sauer, his thoughts on Rickson's fighting style, cornering Tank Abbot in the UFC, his thoughts on wrestlers in the early UFCs, and much more. I know you're going to enjoy this interview with an absolute legend. After the interview, make sure you stick around for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. And now, without further ado, let's talk to Mark. All right, I'm speaking with the legendary Olympic and world champion wrestler and Pedro Sauer black belt, Mark Schultz. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Yes, sir. You know, it's an honor to be speaking with one of the most accomplished and successful wrestlers in history. And you're also an accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner, a UFC veteran, and a best-selling author. So I do want to talk a little bit about all of those, but to get us started, Mark, if you would just tell us kind of where you grew up and how you got started in wrestling.
Okay, I grew up in, my parents were divorced, and I spent about half my time in Ashland, Oregon. But my parents, they were divorced, so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, especially my grandmother. And I did all kinds of sports when I was in the 7th and 8th grade. You know, I did track. I played basketball every lunch break and just returned to class covered in sweat and then in the 8th grade, my brother started wrestling in the 7th grade, and he was 3-3-1 on the junior high JVs. And then in the 8th grade, he took 4th in the state. And then in the 9th grade, he took 2nd in the World Schoolboy Championships. And then in the 10th grade, he moved to California. Well, he moved to California when he was in the 8th grade, or after his 8th grade year, when he was in the 9th grade. And one day I went to wrestling practice with him, and the coach there, Ed Hart, I'm going to submit his name to be inducted into the California Wrestling Hall of Fame. He said, "Mark, I bet you I can teach you a backflip in 5 minutes." And he did. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And so I quit all sports and I went into gymnastics. And I took gymnastics for 2 years up until my sophomore year in high school. And I was pretty good. I took first place in the Northern California all-around championships for my age group. And gymnasts are the best athletes in the world. And I knew after I had done my 2 years of gymnastics that no matter what sport I went into, I was going to have a huge advantage because I could do things nobody else could do. So that really helped a lot in wrestling when I switched over to wrestling. But I didn't have much confidence. Even though I was a great athlete, I didn't have a lot of confidence in my ability to defend myself. And so I quit gymnastics in the 10th grade. And I started taking Tang Sudo, which is a Chuck Norris style martial art. And I was really good because I was a gymnast. I could kick over the tops of people's heads. And my brother came up for my 16th birthday to Oregon to visit me. And he said something really disrespectful. I don't even remember what it was, but I was pissed. And I thought, okay, I'm going to show my brother who the real boss of the family is. Right. Now. 4 months of Tang Sudo training, right?
Yeah.
So we go out on the front lawn, and I took a swing at him, and he double-legged me, got the mount, and pounded my face into just
man.
And I was so embarrassed. I slept in the car that night.
Oh,
but
wow.
Next day, I said to myself, screw Tang Sudo, I'm going out for the wrestling team. So I went out for the wrestling team the very next day, and I wasn't very successful. My junior year in high school, I only had 10 matches, and I only won 4 of them. And this was at 130 pounds. And then the coach had a challenge match system where, in order to make the varsity, you had to beat anybody that was behind you in the lineup every single week. And I wrestled this one guy. He was second in our district, and I beat him 10 out of 11 times. And so I earned my spot on the varsity, but the coach kicked me off the varsity anyway, even though I was winning my challenge matches, because I wasn't winning enough in competition. So I went to the principal and I complained, and I said, this guy created a challenge match system. I made the team, under his system, and then he kicks me off the team. That's not right. I complied with his system, and he still kicked me off the team. So it's kind of funny because after I won the Olympics, I came back to Ashland and they gave me the key to the city. And he showed up at the ceremony, and it was kind of awkward.
Oh, that's great.
Anyway, yeah.
That's great.
After my junior year, he kicks me off the team. I complained to the principal, but because I complained to the principal forced him to put me back on varsity. But because I complained to the principal, my relationship with the coach was just dead. So I couldn't wrestle for this coach anymore. And I decided to transfer back to Palo Alto. And so I did. And all the while I'm in I'm in Ashland, Oregon, my brother is going through the greatest high school senior year in history. He wins the Great Plains, which is a really tough tournament, and he beat the two-time defending NCAA champion and the NCAA Outstanding Wrestler, Chuck Yagla, and then he beat World Cup champion Joe Tice, and that qualified him for the Tbilisi tournament, which basically is the Russian national championships. And it's a super tough tournament. It's maybe tougher than the Olympics or the Worlds because there's like 10 Russians at every weight that were all capable of winning the Worlds. Well, winning the Great Plains qualified him for Tbilisi, but the head of the national governing body, which was the AAU back then, it's not what it is. It's USA Wrestling now, but back then it was the AAU. And the president or executive director of the AAU was Newt Koppel. And he told my brother that he wasn't going to bring him to Tbilisi. And my brother asked him, why not? And he said, because that win over Yagla was a fluke. And he goes, well, I didn't just beat Yagla. I beat Joe Tice, the World Cup champion, too. And he said, well, we're not going to bring you anyway. So all the guys on the U.S. team got together and they petitioned New Koppel and said, you got to bring him. He qualified. And so he reluctantly brought him. Well, then Dave took a silver medal in Tbilisi, which is better than anybody else in the entire U.S. team. And then he missed all the state qualifying tournaments because he was over in Russia. And so he didn't qualify for state. Well, my coach, Ed Hart, the same coach that taught me the backflip, he was also my gymnastics coach as well as my wrestling coach, which is kind of a coincidence. But anyway, Coach Hart petitioned the California State Coaches Association to let Dave wrestle in the state tournament. So all the coaches knew how great Dave was, so they agreed. But they said, because you haven't weighed in, you're going to have to wrestle one weight class above your normal weight. So he wrestled in the Central Coast section. He won that. This is at 170. Now he's a 59 pounder, and so he wrestled. He beat everybody at the Central Coast section, and then he went to state and he pinned everybody at state except for the guy in the finals. He beat that guy 12-1, and so now he's a state champion at a weight above his normal weight. And then he goes and competes at the U.S. Open Greco-Roman Championships at 149.5 pounds, and he wins that. And he also gets the Guerrerian Award, which is the award for the most falls in the least amount of time. So he's done all this. Great Plains, Tbilisi, State, and the U.S. Open, all during his senior year in high school. That's the greatest high school senior year in history. Now, because of Dave's insanely incredible high school senior year, they give out the Dave Schultz High School the National Wrestling Hall of Fame gives out Dave Schultz High School Excellence Award.
Wow, that's great.
Every top wrestler in every state, plus one wrestler for the entire country. So here Dave is winning all of this stuff as a senior in high school, and I'm just starting wrestling. And then I transfer back from Ashland, Oregon to Palo Alto, California, and I grew over the summer 30 pounds.
Wow.
So now I'm starting my senior year at 154 pounds. And then it goes up a pound every month until it gets to 159 at state. But I went through my entire senior year without winning one even little 16-team tournament. I took third at the Monte Vista, and then I didn't even win a match at the Alisal. And those were my only experience in any tournaments prior to the state qualifiers. And then at the end of the year, I won the league. But see, I knew I was good enough to win. I would work out twice as much as everybody else. I'd go to my practice, and then I'd go over to Gunn High School, which was across town, and I'd wrestle with the Stanford guys during their practice. So I was getting 2 workouts in a day compared to everybody else's one. And then I'd go running or something. I mean, I was working out way more than I was packing all this experience into this short amount of time. And then at the end of my senior year, I won the league, which was 9 schools, and then I won the region, which was 20 schools. Anyway, that qualified me for the state, and the Central Coast section has got 90 schools in it. So even though I hadn't won even a little 16-team tournament, I knew I was good enough to beat a guy who was better than 90 schools. Matter of fact, I was beating the guy that beat the guy in practice. But anyway, that qualified me to state. And at state, well, I had studied this Eastern Indian philosopher named Jiddu Krishnamurti. And he taught me how to observe my mind and observe the world for what is and not what should be. And to just to observe my mind without judgment and not think, and just live totally in the present and understand that the past is dead and gone. And so I was living totally in the present. And to this day, I'm still the only California State Wrestling Champion never to win a tournament prior to the state qualifiers at the end of my final year. And the thing that makes it amazing, and this story was submitted to Ripley's Believe It or Not, the thing that makes this amazing is you've got one senior year on one side of the spectrum, a guy who's never won even one tournament prior to the state qualifiers. And then you've got his brother who's won just everything. And had the greatest high school senior year in history.
Yeah.
And we're brothers. That's really weird.
It's wild, man. It's wild. But, it really says a lot about you because you didn't start out winning a lot or, having a great success, but you must have had the fire. You had the belief somewhere that you did have what it takes, or you would have quit, right? So you pressed on. Well, props to you for that, for sure.
Because I came out of nowhere at the very end of my senior year, nobody knew about me. So I only got 2 scholarship offers. One was UCLA and the other one was Oklahoma State. And the Oklahoma State offer, they gave me the scholarship offer because my brother was making statements that he was not happy at Oklahoma State and he wanted to leave. And so they gave me a scholarship to try to keep him. They didn't even care about me. So
that's pretty strategic.
Yeah. But his freshman year, he went 35-1, and he won the freshman. He was voted freshman of the year. And anyway, Dave comes back from Oklahoma State, and he's now freshman of the year, and I'm state champion, and now we're the same weight. And so he would ask me, you want to go work out? And if I said no, he'd just go, it would piss me off, and I'd be like,
sure.
All right, you're going to die. And we'd go, and he would just kill me like 50-0. And this went on every day, all summer long. And then finally, after getting killed like 50-0 every day, I decided, you know what, I don't know why I'm not scoring any points, but maybe I should change my strategy and shift from it. Instead of trying to score on him, I'll just try to keep him from scoring on me. So every time he tried something, I would back up, I'd break his lock. I just became this incredible staller. And it worked. I wasn't getting beat that bad. I was only getting beat like 2 or 3-0 after that. And that gave me a lot of confidence because Dave was pretty much the best in the world at that point. And I knew if I could keep Dave from scoring on me, I'd keep anybody from scoring.
Yeah, for sure.
So that really helped my confidence a lot. And then I went to UCLA. I chose UCLA as kind of an intermediate step because I didn't want to go to Oklahoma State because I'd only been wrestling 16 months. So if I went to Oklahoma State against these guys that have been wrestling their whole life, they're national champions, I was probably going to have my confidence destroyed by these guys before I even had a chance to build up even a minimal amount of confidence. So I decided instead to go to UCLA, and UCLA was great. It's great to have a freshman year at UCLA. There's movie stars everywhere. The beach is right there. It's always sunny. It's just a great, great school. And but there was a lot of problems with the coaching staff. They were always fighting with each other. And me and Dave, we were like, man, this is a rinky-dink program. And Dave actually transferred from Oklahoma State to UCLA to be with me. And then after my freshman year, I went 18-8 my freshman year. And 4 of those losses came at 150 pounds. My coach asked me to suck down to 150 because back then in his day, everybody was cutting their balls off to make weight. They thought it was like an advantage to be, bigger, but you're at a lower weight class. But it's not, it didn't work for me because I was a gymnast and I didn't have any fat to cut. I lost 4 of those matches at 150 pounds. I lost 4 of my 8 losses that year at 150 pounds. So when I got back from that road trip, I told myself, I'm never going to listen to anybody tell me what weight class I can go in again. And I never did. I became my own best coach, and I only wrestled the weight class that I felt comfortable at. And it allowed me to push myself, my cardiovascular conditioning, harder. I could, without having to worry about cutting weight, because cutting weight is miserable. And if you're cutting weight on top of pushing yourself to suffocation multiple times a day, it's going to burn you out pretty quick. So I decided I'd be at 58 my freshman year at UCLA. And then because of the problem with coaching staff, we transferred to Oklahoma, which is Oklahoma State's biggest rival. They're cross-state rivals. They have the Bedlam series and all that.
Yeah.
Dave finally gets into the finals, and he's facing Ricky Stewart. And he had beaten Stewart 3 times that year, but in the finals he was winning, I think 3-0, and then got caught with an outside fireman's to a half and got pinned. And I was in the back warming up, and I hear the crowd go crazy, and I'm like, oh, Dave must have pinned him. And I walk out there and I see Ricky running around with his arms over his head. And I was like, oh crap, Dave just lost. So now it's my turn to go out and wrestle Mike Deanna. And I've been in the NCAA finals 3 times, and each time was against an Iowa guy, which is kind of an unusual coincidence. But when I wrote my book, actually my senior year in college, Dan Gable, the coach of Iowa, wrote a book called The Iowa Way. And so when I wrote my book, I thought I'm going to call this book How to Beat the Iowa Way. So, it ends up being called Foxcatcher to take advantage of the publicity around the movie. But anyway,
I want to get to your Olympic experience, but so you're in college now. What are some of the most standout memories of your college career, and then how did that lead you to being in the Olympics?
Man, I have so many memories that stand out from my college career. I mean, Oklahoma was pure hell. Literally, it was hell on earth. I remember I was running around this duck pond with Andre Metzger one time, and I asked him, do you believe in heaven and hell? And he goes, yeah, and I believe this is hell. And I had to, because, man, the first day I showed up at Oklahoma, the coach ran us around this duck pond. It's about a 2-mile track, and it was 107 degrees out, 98% humidity. and it was like running on the surface of the sun. I mean, it was just so hot. And also, when I got to Oklahoma, you have to redshirt. And there was a guy at 158 at my weight class that I was going to have to beat to make the team. His name was Israel Shepherd. And this dude was a badass. I mean, this guy he could sprint like a cheetah. He was built like Hercules. I mean, this guy was he was a three or four time All-American. And I think he had just taken third when I transferred there. And so I'm thinking, man, how am I going to beat this guy to make the team? This is going to be practically, I didn't know if I could do it. I mean, I really didn't. And I spent my entire redshirt year trying to like crush Israel's confidence down to build mine up. Your confidence is either built up or destroyed every day, and it's usually at the expense of somebody else. So I tried as hard as I could, and after a while I started beating Israel, and because I had two things going for me. One, I wasn't cutting weight, and he was, and another, I wasn't competing, and he was. So he had all this pressure on top of him, on top of the fact that he had me trying to beat him every day in the wrestling room. And man, we just went at it like crazy. He had these cornrows in his hair, and cornrows are incredibly abrasive. You ever feel a black guy's cornrowed hair? It's like steel wool. And he would grind those cornrows into my face every day at practice. And he'd scrape the skin, like the first layers of the epidermis, scrape off. And then I'd go take a shower afterwards, and it would just be like,
oh man,
sting like crazy.
I bet.
And like, man, how am I going to beat this guy? And then one day I was wearing these Cliff Keen headgear, and they have like a metal frame underneath this padding. And one day I noticed that the padding had worn away from the top of these headgear, and the metal was shining through. And one day Israel went to headbutt me, and I turned my head and cut him with the metal. And I thought, I think I just found the answer to Israel's cornrows. Anyway.
That's great.
And then I won my last 44 matches in a row at Oklahoma. I won my senior year, which was a kind of an uneventful year. I mean, for me, it was incredibly high pressure. There's nothing more high pressure than facing your senior year because you want to go out a winner. And now I'm a two-time NCAA champion. If I lose my senior year, my life is ruined. So I'm going out there, and I only won in the finals 4-2 against Dwayne Goldman from Iowa, of course. And thank God I got out of that alive with 3 NCAA titles. And then we got jobs at Stanford. And I remember the coach at Stanford every time. And now Dave, my senior year in college, Dave didn't wrestle. He had already graduated. So he just wrestled freestyle the whole year. And he won the U.S. Open, got the OW, and then he goes to the World Championships, and he wins the Worlds. And now I'm a 3-time NCAA champion, and the NCAAs is a real world championship. There's only one country in the world that wrestles folk style, and that's America. And if you look at the way folk style rules go, you have to be really good at escaping and riding. And I had this really great escape and riding concept that I used all the time. And in the finals of the NCAAs, I had like 3 minutes riding time on my opponents the first 2 years, and then 4 minutes riding time on my opponent my last year. So I would always get riding time usually, and my opponents never got that riding time point on me after my freshman year in college. So Um, anyway, I set the record for most wins in a single season without a loss. So I went 27-0 that senior year. And but man, was that the most pressure-packed year of my life. I hurt my back 2 months before the NCAA's, and so I didn't even wrestle in the wrestling room the last 2 months of the season. I was swimming in the swimming pool trying to get my cardio up. And I'll tell you how much pressure was on me my senior year to win was, to this day, I have these nightmares, this recurring nightmare, and it's always the same thing. It's like the day before the NCAA's, and for some reason, I forgot to work out the last 2 months, and I can't figure out how am I going to win. And I'm coming up with all these, scenarios in my mind, like take a knife and stab myself, or just call a bunch of injury timeouts or something. I don't know how I'm going to do. But then I always wake up in a cold sweat, and I thank God it was only a dream. But that's how much pressure was on me my senior year. It created this recurring nightmare.
Wow.
Thank God I got out of it alive.
I'll say.
But every time when we got jobs at Stanford, the coach at Stanford, after Dave wins the Worlds, would always introduce us to people and say, "Oh, this is my assistant coach, Dave Schultz, world champion, and this is his brother, Mark." And he would never mention the fact.
Oh man, that's messed up.
An NCAA championship.
Yeah, that's bad.
World championship, and NCAA folk style is actually closer to a real fight than freestyle, because you got to ride, you got to escape, you still got takedowns, and so it's like in the UFC collegiate style. Look at Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero cannot get away from the bottom because he's never practiced escape, so he gets taken down and he's on the bottom the whole time. You want a collegiate wrestler would know how to escape.
Right.
But this guy's second in the Olympics. He's world champion. He can't get away from the bottom.
Interesting.
Because he's not. Folk style is a superior style when it comes to fighting in the UFC.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about wrestlers in the UFC in just a minute. Before we transition on, tell me about your experience winning gold at the Olympics.
Okay, this is what happened. At the Olympics, the way you weigh in is you step on a scale, you make weight, then you reach into this bucket and you pull an egg out, and then you open it up, and inside the egg is a number. And if you're an odd number, you get put on the left side of the bracket. If you're an even number, you get put on the right side of the bracket. And they run the even and the odd brackets like they're separate tournaments within a tournament. And then the winner of each bracket wrestles in the finals for the gold medal. Well, I step on the scale and I make weight. I reach into the bucket. I open it up, and I pull out the number 6. Well, Reza Karavajak is the number 1 ranked wrestler in the world. He beat all the Russians that boycotted the '84 Olympics. He won the European Championships. He's got the number 1 seed at the Olympics. Not that seed even mattered there, but he's ranked number 1. At least that's what Sports Illustrated did. And so he's standing right behind me, and he gets on the scale and weighs in, and he pulls out the number 8. So the first match of the Olympics, number 2 wrestles number 4, and number 6 wrestles number 8. So I've got the gold medal match, my very first match.
Wow.
This is only my second international tournament. I'm scared out of my mind.
I bet you are.
So I go back to my room, and I can't watch TV. I'm just sitting on my bed, staring at the wall, just sweating and thinking and just just wondering what's going to happen, just staring at the wall. And for 2 hours, I did that. And then first move of the match, he does a limp arm a limp arm to a high crotch. And he gets in really deep, and he comes up with my leg. And I had seen this move done by a Cuban in the Pan Am Games to some guy from Paraguay or Uruguay or one of those Guay countries. And he kicked the guy in the groin, threw him head over heels, and got 2 points. And it's basically a kimura. And what we called it a double wrist lock back in the day before the Brazilians came here and renamed it. But anyway, I did the double wrist lock on the guy, and he hit his head halfway through the move and stopped his momentum. But because I had a hold of his arm, I kept going, even though his body stopped. My body didn't. And it snapped. His elbow snapped instantly, and I could feel it. And he fell on his back, and I fell on top of him. And I'm looking at the ref like, hurry up and call the pin,
Right.
He called the pin. I got up. I was like, thank God I got the number one guy in the tournament out of the tournament. And
Amazing.
I knew he was done because of the elbow snapping like that.
Dang.
But still, I had a very, very tough guy. My third match in the Olympics was against Chris Rinke. Chris Rinke is the Canadian. And when I was at Oklahoma, we had an assistant coach named Jim Humphrey. And matter of fact, Jim was the main reason that Dave and I decided to go to Oklahoma, because he was on the Junior World Training Camp coaching roster, and we met him. He was a really fun guy, and we just liked him a lot. So we decided to go to Oklahoma and wrestle for him. Well, my senior year in college, this is another reason why my senior year in college was so stressful, was he left. Coach Humphrey left to take a job as the national coach of Canada. And, my brother's graduated, Andre Metzger's graduated. So I'm basically all alone. But thank God I got out of it alive. Anyway, Jim Humphrey is now the coach of Canada. And Chris Rinke moves onto the property where Jim lives in Canada and spends 2 years training with Jim. Now, Jim knows me better than anybody, and he's training Chris Rinke how to beat me. And, it was weird seeing him in my opponent's corner at the Olympics. And anyway, it was the closest match I've ever had in my life. And it was also the most important. It was also the most high-pressure packed match you could imagine. Everything's on the line, and me and him are scrapping. And it's super close. And towards the end of the match, I've got 2 stalling calls on me, and the referees hate me because I broke the Turk's arm. So they're looking to caution me out for stalling. So I'm only ahead by 1 point. And I had thought in my mind that if I give away a point, I would still win the tiebreaker criteria. But I was wrong. I wouldn't have. So the referee's screaming at me, "Passez rouge, passez rouge." That's stalling red in French. That's international language wrestling. And in other words, I know he's going to throw me out of the match for stalling if I don't shoot. So without even setting it up, I just shot in. And miracle upon miracles, Rinke grabs me in a front body lock. And I just happened to have an unstoppable counter to a front body lock. I call it a duck scoop. And so I duck scooped him, and I got a point. And so now instead of the score being 4-3, it's 5-3. Now I can even give away a takedown and still win. But there's only 6 seconds left. So that's how I won that match. And Chris Rinke and I are great friends to this day. He's a really good guy. He's a really tough guy, too. And he's built like a rock. Even to this day, he's built like a rock. And he's 60 years old. So, and you know what? It was weird. The closest match I ever had in my life, I barely came out on top, just barely. And I find out after Foxcatcher, the movie is made, and there's a Vancouver Film Festival that he attended and was made to co-host that festival because they were going to call me on the phone and have me talk at the festival to introduce the audience to the movie. I mean, it was broadcast over the loudspeakers. Well, Chris Rinke gets on there, and they asked me, "What do you think of Chris?" And I'm like, "Oh, he's the toughest guy, man. Just super tough. And then Chris tells me that he can never forget my birthday because he was born on the exact same day as me. Same year, same day.
Wow.
And it's weird because I came out of that match just slightly ahead of him. Well, when I was born at 7:30 in the morning, he was born at noon that day, just slightly behind me.
That's funny. That's too funny. So you mentioned Foxcatcher. Let's talk a little bit about that. A very crazy time in your life, and you wrote a book, a memoir, became a New York Times bestseller, and then I believe that same year they came out with a feature film about that experience. So tell us a little bit about the events leading up and what it was like being at Foxcatcher, and then, of course, the tragic ending of that.
Okay. First of all, I want everybody to know my book, Foxcatcher, I do not like that name. Matter of fact, I hate that name. But the publishers knew that by naming it Foxcatcher, they would be able to take advantage of the publicity surrounding the movie. So they named it Foxcatcher. But like I said, I wanted to call it How to Beat the Iowa Way, but
I like that better.
Right. They won that.
Sure.
But that book is not a book about the murder. It is not a true crime book. It is my autobiography. And it's funny because if you look at some of the comments people have made on Amazon, one guy gets on there, he gave me 1 star, and he goes, "Mark Schultz is all about me. And I'm thinking, this is my autobiography.
Yeah, it's supposed to be about me, man. Oh, it's rich. You know, you're always going to get all kinds of people weighing in, right, on those reviews. So, man, don't let that worry you a bit, because it was a bestseller and people loved the book.
Not only is it a New York Times bestseller, it's also the best-selling amateur wrestling book on Amazon, and it's an Amazon editor's choice.
Wow. Impressive.
You know, I couldn't believe it when it was elevated to editor's choice. That means Amazon guys read it and liked it and chose it.
That's an amazing accomplishment for sure.
I wrote that book in 2 weeks. I got done fighting in the UFC, and I had so much energy after I had ended my career going out a winner. That's one thing people don't know, is that I threw my last match in the 1988 Olympics. I just threw, because I felt it was immoral to win an Olympic gold medal for that creep DuPont. I was representing his team, and I just could not win for that guy. My DNA would not allow me. He was a creepy guy. I didn't like him. I never should have went there. It was a huge mistake going there. And
So for those that don't know, just quickly, so Foxcatcher, so DuPont, the heir to the DuPont fortune, was a big fan of amateur wrestling, right? And he had this place, this biggest mansion, and he invited everybody to come to train there, right? So take it from there.
That's right. And that facility did not exist when I was there. See, the movie is 100% fiction. Murder is exactly the way it did on the court records, but even that's screwed up. They didn't show DuPont barricading himself inside his mansion for 48 hours. They have him getting arrested right away. So everything in that movie is pure lies, pure fiction, and it's boring. But at least they got the sexiest man alive to play me.
To play you, that's right. They had to scour the earth to find someone special enough, right?
Yeah.
And they came up with Channing Tatum. I will say about the movie, Steve Carell, I'm a fan of him from The Office, and it was the first time I saw him in a serious role. And I didn't know anything about John DuPont, so when I saw it, I was like, man, this guy is a dark, freaky character for sure. And the bad thing about movies that are based on books, rarely do they stay super accurate or truthful to the book, which is unfortunate. But I enjoyed the movie but that's because I'm an outsider and I didn't know any better than you. It's a lot more difficult because you know all the inconsistencies, I'm sure.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Bennett Miller, the director of Foxcatcher, he is quoted in the Washington Times. He's saying, "My intention from the beginning was to demean and disrespect Mark Schultz."
Really?
Can you believe it?
That's nuts. What was his problem?
I tried so hard. He's a selfish, evil person. I tried so hard to make him the best director he could be. I did everything. I gave him every idea he had. And I let him take credit for all those ideas. And I was happy to do it. But when he came out with that statement, I turned on him and I went on Twitter and I told him, "I can't stand you. I can't stand any movie you make. I hate your guts. I hope you die. And the world media got a hold of my tweets and they republished them all over the world. You can find them anywhere online right now. Or I'm telling Bennett Miller to die." Because he really, I mean, when I read that quote, and then it all made sense because he was so selfish about like inviting me to the film festivals and stuff. He invited the actors and everybody else, but not me. He didn't want me there because I'm, the true story. He didn't like me because I would not reduce my life rights. I have film life rights, and I also have literary life rights. Well, I carved my literary life rights out from my film life rights, and I sold my film rights, and so that's what they had. But because I kept my literary rights for myself, I was able to release a book 4 days after the movie was released, and it contains the true story. And because he called me one day and he goes, "All the actors are taking pay cuts. We need you to take a pay cut too." And I'm like, "Hey, look, these actors are multi-millionaires.
Yeah.
They can take a pay cut. It doesn't affect them. I've only got one life story to tell. This is my one shot.
Right.
And so ever since then, things went downhill, and they tried to keep me out of the film festivals, and they only brought me to 3 of them. And even at the Cannes Film Festival, I told Bennett Miller, "Hey, if you want," this is before I read that quote of his, I said, "If you want to win at Cannes, keep your head down and your mouth shut." And he did. And he won Best Director. And he did it, I think, a lot because I was supporting him. But the minute I withdrew my support for the movie went right down the toilet. Mm-hmm. When it went to the Oscars, I got 5 Oscar nominations, but nobody won because Bennett came out with that quote. but I decided to be merciful at the very end, and I apologized. I didn't apologize for standing up for myself. I apologized for the harshness of my language. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of stuff happened behind the scenes. I'm going to write another book. I'm going to make another movie, and I'm going to tell the true story.
Mm. But you said the ending and the tragic killing of your brother, that was pretty accurate.
Well, when I say accurate, I mean the murder took place exactly like it happened in the court records. And when I say murder, I mean from the moment DuPont pulled his Lincoln Continental or whatever it was up to my brother's house while my brother's outside working on his car, and then DuPont pulls a gun out, kills him, and then drives away. All of that is according to the court record. But everything before that and everything after that is complete inaccurate. It doesn't even my opponent in the UFC. This is a historical fight that I had in the UFC. My opponent was a black Canadian, Gary Big Daddy Goodrich, who wore a gi. But in the movie, there's a white Russian who's not wearing a gi. I mean, it's kind of like, if Mike Tyson was fighting, Trevor Berbick for the world title instead of whoever it was who won. I mean, it's a historic fight, and because he chose to change that historic fight, everything else in the movie has been caught. The credibility destroys the credibility of the entire movie.
Yeah, it's just a shame that people can't go with how things really happened and have to try to jazz it up or change it, and it just loses something,
It's boring. I mean, when I looked at that movie right before they released, that movie was made twice. A lot of people don't know this, but it was made the first time, and they put previews out on YouTube. It was going to be released in 2 weeks, and I went. And they flew me out to see it right before it's released. And I don't know why they did it so close to when it was being released, because, what if I didn't like it?
Yeah, right.
Which I didn't. But I felt like I didn't have a choice because it's already been done. But when I saw that movie, I was like, oh my God, this is the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life. And it's about me. How can I be bored?
That sucks. Well, it sounds like it was a crazy experience. Everything behind the scenes, and then all the film festivals and all the drama between you guys is just. But I want to say sorry about the tragic. I know it's been many years, but sorry about the tragic death of your brother. I know he's such a big part of your life, and it had to be a real turning point in your life.
Yeah, it's been almost, was it 96? It's almost 30 years since the murder. So, I've lived with it for a long time, and, it doesn't really, I miss my brother, but it doesn't. I appreciate you saying sorry, but you don't. I'm not like living in pain over anything anymore. I was for a little while.
So let's change gears a little, Mark. I know you said the movie was boring to you, but something that sounds like it wasn't very boring is your encounter with Rickson Gracie back in the day. And Rickson was quoted in saying, "Mark Schultz is one of the best grapplers in the world." So pretty high praise for someone considered one of the best fighters in the world back in his day. So tell us a little bit about that time with him.
Okay, well, this is a good story because I met Pedro Sauer after this happened. I'm now the assistant coach. This is 1991. I'm the assistant coach at Brigham Young University. And I get a call. I'm at my house, and I get a call one day, and it's from this guy. He's blue belt with Pedro Sauer blue belt. And he goes, "Is this Mark Schultz, the Olympic wrestling champion?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, the best jiu-jitsu fighter in the world is in town. Do you want to fight him?" And I said, "Well, what are the rules?" And this guy tried to intimidate me. And he goes, "There are no rules." And I was like, "Really? No rules at all? What are we going to do? Commit a homicide?" I mean, I didn't know. So I should have, but I wasn't going to back down. I said, "Okay, you tell him to meet me in the BYU wrestling room a week from Thursday." Because I had to go to the NCAAs that week. So I can't even think straight. I'm thinking about this match all week long. Like, I don't know this guy. I've never had anybody challenge me like this. And of course, the guy challenging me wasn't the guy that I was going to fight. Of course, he wouldn't do that. But anyway, so the day comes around, and I walk into the BYU wrestling room, and I see Rickson scooting on his butt, trying to hook Alan Albright's ankles. Alan Albright was my boss. He was the head coach at BYU. And as soon as I walk in, everybody stops talking, and Rickson stands up, and he comes over to me, and he goes, "Are you the guy?" I go, "Yeah, I'm the guy." "Are you the guy?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm the guy." And he goes, "What I do is I punch, kick, elbow, knee, headbutt. But today we're not going to do that. We're just going to do submission grappling until one of us taps out." So I was pretty relieved there wasn't going to be a homicide that day.
I bet you were.
So we start wrestling or grappling or whatever. And I take him down, and I've got him in a cradle for about 20 minutes. And that's a long time to hold somebody in a cradle. Now, there's no conversation going on. It's just, we're totally silent. And I've got, finally my grip gave out, and he threw his legs around my head and my arm. And I kind of let him do it because I didn't know what he was doing. And then he got me in a triangle. And of course, once you lock up a triangle, you can't get out. So he's got this locked up, and I tap out. And I was like, "Wow, that's pretty cool. Let's go again." So we went another 20 minutes, and I've been on top of him now for 40 minutes, and I haven't gotten anything. Now, I don't know any submission holds because they're against the rules of wrestling. As a matter of fact, if you open up a wrestling rule book and you look at all the moves that are against the rules, it looks like a jiu-jitsu instruction manual. So I don't know anything. I know the double wrist lock because I broke the Turk's arm with it. And I did a little judo in Colorado Springs when I was dating this judo player. So I knew enough to keep my elbows in and my chin down. But I've been on top of him for 40 minutes. I can't get him in anything. Of course, he's an expert at jiu-jitsu submission. That's all he does. So I thought I'm going to let him get on top of me and see if he can do anything. So I let him reverse me, and me being a wrestler, I had brainwashed myself into going belly down. So I turned belly down, and I got my arms out, splayed out wide, like I'm trying to keep him from turning me in freestyle. Well, that's the dumbest thing you can do. And he just starts weaving in this,
rear naked choke, yeah.
This rear naked, and he finally gets it, and I'm tapping out again. And after it was all over, I was just stunned that anything like this, I never even thought anything like this even existed before. And so I was so intrigued by this, and it really helped me a lot psychologically because I went out a loser in the 88 Olympics, and here I am discovering that there's a better martial art when it comes to submissions than wrestling. And so I combined the takedowns of wrestling and the conditioning of wrestling with the submission holds of jiu-jitsu, and I was able to use that in the UFC. But
Yes.
one thing I just love about Rickson is he said to me afterwards, he goes, Mark, you're the toughest guy I've ever gone against.
Wow.
And I was like, man, I love you, man.
Yeah, that's incredible. That had to
So,
make you feel good. You don't know really submissions, but you hung for that long, and then for him to give you that feedback, man, that's gotta feel great.
not only did it feel great, but it felt even better to find out that one of his students, Pedro Sauer, just happened to have a club in Provo, Utah, of all places. I mean, the Gracies had just come to America, and most of them settled in L.A., but Pedro settled in Provo to have a separate club. And I mean, of all the places, I mean, it's almost like a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
All of these things just fell into place, including the way my match in the UFC happened. It just kind of fell into my lap at the last minute. And, I only had like an 8-hour preparation to fight. I mean, I asked if I could fight the night before, but the next day I'm in there fighting. But I became a student of Pedro's for like 3 years. And when we went to the UFC, Dave Benito was supposed to be the guy that fight in the UFC.
Right.
He calls up Pedro and he says, I'm going to come down and train with you. And so Pedro calls me and he said, hey, Mark, will you train with Dave to prepare him for the UFC? And I was like, yeah, sure. So he comes down and we work out for 2 weeks. And one day I slammed him and it hit on his hand somehow. And his metacarpal in his hand, it broke. And I took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, if we put a cast on, you can't fight, obviously, but if we put a plate in, maybe you can, you cover it up, maybe no one will even notice. So I said, I'm going to go to Detroit with you to be your corner man because I think you're going to get in trouble with that hand. So I went to Detroit with him. Pedro was there, and a bunch of Pedro's guys were there, and we were at the press conference, and somebody ratted Dave out and said that his hand was broken. So the doctor came over, looked at his hand, and said, I'm not going to let you fight. You're done. And so I go over, everybody kind of turned and looked at me. I told Dave Benito at the hospital that I was going to try and take his place if he couldn't fight. So I went over to Bob Meyerowitz and I said, hey, what do you think about me taking Dave's place? And Meyerowitz says, and I quote, oh, that's a great idea. You're Olympic champion. When you lose, it'll be even better.
Dang.
It's like,
Wow.
so I was like, well, that deserves a punch in the face, but since you're going to pay me, I don't think I'm going to do it.
Or at least we'll postpone it, right?
Right. So I had to spend that night deciding whether I was going to do it or not. I said, I need one night to think it over. So the next day, and they kept calling me all these times during the night, like 3 or 4 times, waking me up, asking me for a decision and all this. I'm like, man, you guys are going to destroy my ability to fight if you keep waking me up like this. So I 10 in the morning, they call me. They go, if we don't have an answer right now, we're getting someone else. I was like, okay, I'll come down right now. I came down there with Pedro, and I said, I saw Meyerowitz and Art Davies in the lounge area, and I said, give me one more minute. And I went over to a corner and I started to pray, asking God if I should do this. And I was getting this very strong feeling that there was something either behind me or above me, or something was telling me, you got to do it.
Mm.
And so I got up, turned around, told him I was doing it. We got a cup, an AIDS test.
And it was game on.
A lot of people don't know this. There's only 2 rules in that UFC: no biting and no eye gouging.
Yeah, because this is way back in like UFC 9, right? I mean, it's pretty early into it, pretty wide open.
Right. So a lot of people don't know this, but there was actually a 3rd rule, and that was if you decided to wear shoes, you weren't allowed to kick. So I decided to wear shoes because my style requires traction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. And it just so happened that one of Pedro's guys brought a size 10 wrestling shoe. I didn't bring any wrestling shoes, but this guy brought the exact size that I needed, which was really weird.
That's
it's another
crazy. Yes.
Some coincidences that made all this happen. It's crazy.
That's very cool. And so you went against Big Daddy, Gary Goodrich, a big, strong, scary dude. And yeah, but you took him down pretty much at will, right? And then he couldn't do much once you had him down.
Yeah, and the takedowns were so much easier because he's wearing a gi. So when I went to double leg him, I grabbed the back of his legs and my hands just naturally wrapped around the cloth.
Yeah.
And it was like having handles on his legs. And I just threw his legs up in the air and he goes down.
Nice.
Gary and I are actually really good friends now. I talk to him all the time. I send him stuff once in a while.
He seemed like a really cool guy. I mean, he had that one persona for the UFC, but everybody, all the people that were announcers were always saying, hey, when you talk to him, he's scary in the promos and everything, but he's like a super, super cool, nice, down-to-earth guy. So,
yeah, he is. He's a very smart, intelligent guy, and him and I'm really grateful that him and I were able to become friends.
So why did you only do the one? Why not go back and do more UFCs? Just curious.
Well, that's a good story in itself. When I did the UFC, there was a lot of negative press in the Salt Lake Tribune. The Salt Lake Tribune decided to put a color picture of me on the cover of the newspaper on top of Gary with blood on the ground. And there's a color picture. And so I don't know if you know anything about the LDS Church or that culture in Utah, but it's very, I don't know, it's very family oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the women were thinking it was, what I was doing was immoral. Like, this one woman called in and she goes, I don't think it's appropriate for a BYU faculty member to turn one of God's children into a hamburger. And so that quote kind of made its way around. Man. And so the president of the school, Merrill Bateman, they had just gotten rid of Rex Lee. I think he got cancer or something. And then Merrill Bateman became the president, and he calls me on the carpet in his office. So I go up to his office, and he said, what you did, Mark, was not what we are about at BYU. And you can keep doing it, but you can't work here. Or you can keep working here, but you can't keep doing it. So I had 3 kids.
Sure.
And they
sure.
needed health insurance. And back then, if you didn't win, you didn't get paid. And if you didn't get paid, not only did you lose, but you got a lot of hospital bills. You got, it was very risky proposition.
Sure. And even if you won, you didn't get paid great. So, yeah, I can understand you're sticking to what a sure thing. You get paid, you get benefits, and it's consistent, and you could rely on it for your family. So totally get that. And it's funny because today it's not looked upon. It's a sport, but back then it was a blood sport. Some kind of human cockfight in a lot of people's minds. So it's definitely changed a lot. I want to ask you about wrestlers in the UFC. But before I do, let's talk a little bit more about your time with Master Pedro, because I feel like we kind of flew through that a little bit. What was it like training with him, and what was the biggest thing you feel like you learned from him?
Pedro is a great, great instructor. And he's also a little guy. So he has to be very technical in order to go against bigger guys, and which makes his technique really, really good. So I was very lucky to have him as my instructor. I was very lucky that he allowed me to be his student. I mean, I called him up and I said, "Hey, can I be your student?" And he's like, "Yeah, my friend, come on down." And he was really cool. And I was just like, thank God he's cool, you know. And he let me become his student. And you know, he taught me all kinds of submission holds, you know, gi, no gi, everything. And I also did a little bit, and Pedro actually had the very first no-holds-barred fight in Utah in, I think, 1991, right? The same year as I did the UFC. And he was on K-Bear 101, it's a radio station, and they were interviewing him, and he's kind of a star already because of the Gracies. He's one of only 2 black belts that is not a member of the Gracie family. So he's a very special guy to the Gracies. And the Gracies, of course, are credited with being the originators of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he was on this K-Bear 101, and the very next guest on K-Bear was Lance Batchelor, who was Mr. Utah bodybuilder. He's about 5'6", but he weighs like 250 pounds. And Pedro's probably 5'8" or 9", and he's only like 130 or 40 pounds, maybe 150. Anyway, he was giving up a lot of weight, and when Batchelor got on K-Bear, one of the hosts of the radio show asked him, "How do you think you do against a guy like Pedro?" And Lance was extremely confident, and he goes, "Oh, I'd kill him. He's a little guy. He wouldn't stand a chance." And Pedro, you know, we all heard it. I was in the club with Pedro at the time. We all heard what he said. And, you know, Pedro's not the type of guy who's just going to stand there and let people badmouth him like that. So he calls into the radio station and he's like, "Hey, you want to have a fight? You think you can beat me? Let's fight." And so he agreed, and I was there. It was 7 in the morning. I think it was at Mike Stedham's gym in Utah. And Lonnie Foster was the referee. He became a UFC referee, but he died a while ago. But Lonnie was one of Pedro's students. Anyway, Lonnie was the referee, and they had a no eye gouging, no biting rule, but everything else was legal. And Pedro wore wrestling shoes that day. I think he thought the fight might be outside, so he was going to wear wrestling shoes or some kind of shoes. And it helped him because he was kicking Lance in the beginning. You know, it helps to have shoes on when you're kicking. And so he's kicking Lance in the knee, and then he throws a punch. His very first punch he throws, he breaks Lance's nose. And then there's blood gushing out of his nose, and it's all over Pedro's gi. I mean, it looks like he just came out of a slaughterhouse. and I'm sitting there watching all this, and I'm just, you know, in awe that this is really going on here. because this is like, you ever see the movie Hard Times with Charles
Yeah,
Bronson?
yeah, absolutely.
It's like that. It's like, okay, we're actually doing this for real. And anyway, I was really impressed. Pedro not only had the guts to do that, but he won on top of that. And he caught him with an arm lock, and he probably could have broke Lance's arm if Lonnie hadn't stopped it. But that I just gained so much respect for Pedro after that. I mean, I always had respect for him anyway, and I knew he was going to win because he's so much better, technically. And Lance, didn't have any jiu-jitsu training, even though he was, really super strong. I mean, this guy's got gigantic arms. And anyway, if you want to be a winner, you have to associate with winners. And Pedro's a winner, and I knew if I just associated with him long enough, I would absorb a lot of the techniques and stuff that, give Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu advantage over other standalone martial arts. And what I did was I started my own club at Midvale Athletic Club, and I combined the takedowns and conditioning of wrestling with the submission holds of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I was much better without a gi because I was a wrestler. And, I mean, a gi is not really a very good advantage. If you look at the UFC, like Gary Goodrich, after my match with him, he took his gi off because he knew it wasn't helping him as much as it was hurting him. And so, but Pedro is a master when it comes to submission holds, especially with a gi on. And I also worked out a little bit with Walt Bayless. Walt Bayless is a really tough guy out of Utah, and he's a Sambo guy, and he was a wrestler, and he created his own style, which had a lot more leg locks and ankle locks and heel locks and things like that. So I learned a lot of those moves from him. But Pedro, he could do an arm lock from anywhere. And he's an encyclopedia of technique, jiu-jitsu technique. And he's a great guy. And he's kind of like was my older brother in a way. When we were in Utah together, he's a couple years older than me. So I had lost my brother to murder. So he kind of became my substitute brother. And it was great. And then he said he was leaving to Virginia. And that was kind of heartbreaking at the same time. But he had taught me enough so that I knew how to learn on my own. You have to be your own best coach eventually in everything anyway. So
it's true.
He got me to the point where I didn't need him anymore. But we're great friends to this day. I'm a black belt. I have a Pedro Sauer black belt I'm very proud of. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best standalone martial art there is. And but in the UFC, you have to know Muay Thai, boxing. The best punchers in the world are boxers. The best kickers and elbows and knees are Muay Thai. The best submission is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the best takedown and the best conditioning is wrestling. So I kind of combined all of those together, mainly wrestling and Jiu-Jitsu, to start my own club.
Yeah, you kind of did the Bruce Lee philosophy of absorb what is useful, right? And drew on what all you needed and suited you and your body type and your disposition and went forward with it. I wanted to ask you, I read where in a speech you said that receiving your black belt from Pedro meant more to you than every other achievement you'd ever made, including Olympic gold. Did you really say that?
I said it meant as much to me as the Olympic gold. I don't know if I said it meant more to me, but definitely what meant as much to me.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Let's shift back a little bit to the UFC. What did you think when you first saw? Do you remember which UFC you saw for your first one, and what did you think? And then I want to ask you about early wrestlers in MMA and the UFC. So,
Well, the very first no bar street fight or fights that I saw was Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in action. And the thing that really stood out to me in that video was Rickson Gracie fighting that guy Zulu.
Oh, yeah.
Remember?
Oh yeah, I remember.
When he fought that guy, I looked at Rickson so closely. I studied him so closely that I decided I need to model my style after Rickson. And I did. If you ask, a couple of Japanese reporters came up to me after UFC 9, and they said, "Mark, you look like Rickson Gracie out there." I said, "Well, that shouldn't surprise you because I was trying to look like him." Anyway, that match that he had with Zulu had a big impact on me because it wasn't so much the match itself. It was how Rickson carried himself, the way he acted before that match. It was like he knew he was going to win before the match even started. And I just looked at him and I just was kind of in awe that this guy was so confident in himself and in his skills. And that had that match had a big impact on me. And if you look at the way Rickson fights, he kind of backs up when he gets into the middle of the ring, and then he starts backing up. And I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to draw his opponent closer to him so that he takes a swing at him. And then Rickson closes the distance and gets so close to the guy that he doesn't really get hurt. The guy can't really wind up and punch him because he's too close. And then Rickson would take him down or pull him down. And now he's so close, he can't really get hurt.
Right.
So that philosophy, that style, it was so effective. I thought I need to model myself after that style, and that's what I did.
That's a great philosophy. Nowadays UFC fighters, they pretty much stay in the range, boxing, kicking range. I still prefer the old jiu-jitsu philosophy of all the way out or all the way in, staying away, or like you said, going all the way in and clinching and then taking away their ability to strike effectively and then get them down. So I definitely think that's the best as far as a real fight. What did you think of the earlier wrestlers? I know there was like Dan Severn, Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr, Kevin Jackson, and Kenny Monday were doing some MMA back in. What did you think when you saw those guys getting into MMA?
Well, Dan Severn was the first really good wrestler to get into the UFC. And Dan and I were on the 1985 World Team together. And he was a 220-pounder, and I was a 180-pounder. And so Dan kind of opened the door for wrestlers to walk into the octagon. And then when I walked in, I was the first Olympic champion to walk into the octagon. And I was kind of relieved in a way that some wrestler finally was walking into the cage and fighting, because as soon as I saw Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in action, I wanted to be one of those guys. And I eventually became one of those guys. But I didn't do it until UFC 9. And Dan was competing in UFC 5 and then the Ultimate. And I was actually in Tank Abbott's corner when Tank fought Dan
Really?
in the Ultimate. Yeah. And I kind of hid myself under this hat.
Oh, that's wild.
Dan and I were friends, right? I didn't want him to think I was, against him or anything. I love.
How did you end up in Tank Abbott's corner?
Oh, because I had a heavyweight at BYU named Mike Bolster.
Yeah.
Mike would as soon as I started taking jiu-jitsu, Mike would come into my office and he would challenge me to put on the gloves, take off our shoes, and fight no holds barred in the BYU wrestling room every day for about 3 months in a row. And it's funny because bolster, that word means to boost. Well, he really boosted my confidence after 3 months of fighting no holds barred with him every day. And so after a while, he goes, a friend of mine, Tank Abbot, is going to fight in the Ultimate Fight, and he wants to come out here and train with us at the BYU wrestling team. So I was like, yeah, it's a great idea. So Tank came out with Paul Herrera, and Paul was an All-American wrestler for Nebraska at 145 pounds. I think it was 142. And him and Tank came out there, and they trained with me and my BYU wrestlers for about 2 months prior to the Ultimate. So we became friends during that time, and then when it came time to go to Denver, he asked me to be in his corner, which I did. I had no idea he was going to go up against Severn.
Right. That's really cool. Very cool. What did you think? There were some other, a lot of wrestlers after you, like you said, after the door was opened. People like Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, even Brock Lesnar, and then later Daniel Cormier, among others. Any of those guys stand out, or did your path cross with any of those guys?
Yeah, well, the wrestling world is very small. It's small because it's very hard, and there's not too many people that do it. There are not too many people that get to the top echelons of world wrestling competition. And Mark Coleman was one of the first guys to step in the octagon. I think he was the first heavyweight UFC champion. And then he went over to Pride and he fought the biggest, baddest dudes on the planet in that tournament. And I think he had 3 matches in one day, and he won them all and won the Pride tournament. Well, you got to have an incredible amount of guts to do that.
I'll say.
But I knew, just because I had been in wrestling and now I've been in jiu-jitsu, I knew that if wrestlers decided to get into the octagon, they were going to dominate eventually, because a wrestler can learn submission holds very easily, very fast. All they got to do is look at one submission hold and they can do it. Whereas any other athlete, any other type of athlete tries to wrestle, they can't do it.
Right.
It takes a lifetime to learn.
Right.
It's so unnatural. You know the $1 Million Baby, where he talks about how unnatural boxing is? Like, if you want to punch with your right, you have to turn to your left.
Yes.
Well, that's the same thing with wrestling. It's very unnatural, and it takes a very long time to get to where your body has its own brain. Through training, your body develops its own brain, and you don't have to think about what you're doing. And I got to that point, which is kind of a shame, really. I got to that point, and it took me 11 years to get to that point. And it was in 1988 that I really hit my peak. But I quit in 1988. I quit wrestling in 88 because There was no support for us. USA Wrestling wasn't helping us. Matter of fact, the executive director of USA Wrestling was embezzling money, and that money could have gone to us to keep us in competing longer. I mean, if I had any financial support at all, I probably could have kept wrestling another 5 years. I might have won another couple world titles. I mean, who knows? But because I was so sick of killing myself for nothing, I quit in 1988. But then, thank God, Rickson and Pedro came into my life, and instead of me throwing my last match and going out a loser, I went out a winner in the UFC, and an even more brutal hand-to-hand combat
That's right.
than wrestling. And I didn't get into wrestling to learn how to win championships. I got in it to learn how to fight because I thought it was the best martial art until I found out about jiu-jitsu and I had that match with Rickson. The other wrestlers that go into the UFC, they kind of have the attitude that wrestling is enough, and that's all we need. But I wasn't like that. And they asked me, why weren't you like that? And I said, well, because Rickson choked me out. A strangle can
change your perspective pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're smart enough to know, hey, you've risen to the top in your field, but now if you want to go into something else, you need to learn some other things to make you even more formidable in that arena. So good for you for being open-minded to do that. I think you're right. I think wrestlers, they have such an advantage. Like you said before, that kinesthetic awareness, you can't get that quick. It takes years of cultivating, and they know how to just control people's bodies and push the pace like nobody else. So if you have the ability to control, then you add to that, first, submission defense, because that's the only chance someone might have against a really strong wrestler that's dominating ones, pulling off a submission if we're not getting caught by a strike. So submission defense, and then a few submissions themselves, and man, you're formidable right there. So. And then, of course, adding some striking to be more well-rounded. But most wrestlers that have built years cultivating that skill aren't concerned with being a major striker. They just want to know enough not to get knocked out and maybe throw some stuff to distract enough to use what's their bread and butter. So, yeah.
Well, if you look at top fighters of all time in the UFC, 8 out of the top 10 are wrestlers. But you got to have submission holds. You got to have some boxing. You got to have some Muay Thai, if you're going to fight in the UFC. But the foundation of wrestling, I think, is the best foundation. And then after that, jiu-jitsu, of course, you don't want to go into any cage fights without jiu-jitsu. No way. And that, because of Pedro and Rickson coming into my life, they gave me the confidence I knew I needed to have the guts to step in. And thank God I did, because after I won the UFC, actually stepping into the octagon to me was the victory in itself. The fact that I won was just frosting on the cake. And after I won, I was so excited that I had proved to myself that I not only had the guts to walk in, but I had the skills to survive and win. I had so much excitement. I was so excited after that, because until then I had spent the last 8 years depressed that I had gone out a loser in the '88 Olympics. But then after I went out a winner in the 1996 UFC, I was so excited. I went home and I thought to myself, nobody really knows what I did with my life. I need to at least tell my kids. So I sat down at my computer and I just said, I was born here and this day, blah, blah, blah. And I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And in 2 weeks, I had 60 pages. And that's the basis of the book.
That's great. That's great. There's so many people that have a thought at one time in their life, I should probably write this down, I should record my life, but they don't. So I really respect people like you that do that, decide, so I'm going to, even if they start out like you saying, I'm going to do this for my family at least. And then the impact that it spreads to, is widespread. So, really props to you for doing that and the impact that it's had on people. So really love that. I know you also have done some speaking where you go and tell your story about overcoming adversity and everything. What would you say is the most important ingredient for success, Mark?
You can't care whether you live or die.
All right. You can't care. You just got to go for it.
Yes. When I was in wrestling, I tell this to a lot of people. I think I put this in my book, but I saw this quote in Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he said, life and death were the same. Well, that's kind of what it was like for me, going through my wrestling career and then through, jiu-jitsu and the UFC. It was so hard. It was almost like if I died, it would be easier to die than to live and go through what I'm putting myself through. So, and it's true. Life and death were the same. And I don't think you could teach that.
Well, I just had Master Rickson on the show, and he spoke about his mindset, similar to that, his mindset going into those fights in Japan, those initial ones, where he would go off and train, by himself with just a select few family members, and it was a very spiritual experience for him, and he was literally ready to die if that's what happened, and he made peace with it, and it's like, live or die, I'm ready. So that's what it reminds me of.
And it's kind of liberating to not care whether you live or die. That was my attitude. When I pushed myself, every single day, I had to push yourself to the limits of your own humanity. I mean, you were pushing yourself so hard, it was like you were practically suffocating because you couldn't breathe. You were pushing yourself so hard, it was hard to breathe. It was like I used to dream about having a third lung because I was always getting so tired.
Wow. Yeah, well, like you spoke of earlier, that the immense pressure you had, not only with going up to the Olympics, but through your college career and just being that national champion and everybody gunning for you and having to try to maintain that high level, success. That had to be really hard, but you did it, and you've made a wonderful life out of it. Let me ask you before we close. So what are you doing now? What's your life like, and what's next for you, Mark?
Well, I have my Mark Schultz grappling business. I do all over the country, seminars, camps, clinics. I do speaking engagements where I tell my story, kind of similar to what we're doing here, and or just public appearances, that kind of stuff. And that's what I call my business, Mark Schultz Grappling. And so that's what I do to make money. And people want to contact me for seminars and stuff. They can go on Facebook or Twitter. On Twitter, my handle is Mark Schultz. My nickname in high school was Schultz, so it's my name with the letter Y at the end. That's on Twitter. And then I'm Mark P. Schultz on Instagram, and I'm MS Grappling on Facebook. And you can get a hold of me on any one of those if you want to hire me to come teach a seminar or something.
Excellent. And I'll put links to those in the show notes as well. Well, Mark, thank you so much. It's been a real honor talking to you. I appreciate you coming on. letting us know a little bit more about you and your life, as well as thanks for the impact that you've had in wrestling and jiu-jitsu.
You bet. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Right on. Long, healthy, and prosperous life, my friend. All right. Really enjoyed that conversation with Mark. Had been trying for quite some time to make this interview happen, and we kept going back and forth. Our schedules didn't match up, and then finally the stars aligned and we made it happen. So really glad we did. Really enjoyed talking with Mark. All right, if you haven't checked out the Breathing for BJJ program, I suggest you give it a check. It is a program like no other, and if you have any concern about your breathing at all, you definitely need to check it out. Breathing is the absolutely most important thing we do in life, and you'd be surprised on how much difference it can make on the mat by focusing on breathing correctly, focusing on developing your efficiency and effectiveness and your functional capacity to breathe. And we do this by actually strengthening your breathing muscles through a series of exercises, as well as helping you learn how to regulate your breathing on the mat. So if you're getting older like me, this is absolutely vital. And even if you're not, if you want that little something to give you an edge, definitely this will do it. So check it out at www.breathingforbjj.com. All right, up next is the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment.
What's stopping you? Are you too tired? Didn't get enough sleep? Don't have enough energy? Don't have enough time? Is that what's stopping you right now? Don't have enough money? Is that the thing? Or is the thing that's stopping you, you?
Excuses sound best to the person that's making them up. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Get off the pity potty. Telling everybody your sad and sob stories, trying to get people to show up to your pity potties and your pity parades. If you ever see me in a Rolls Royce, a 6 or 7 star hotel, living my life to the fullest, don't get jealous of me, because I worked my ass off to get it. Nobody handed me nothing. Wake your ass up. Awaken the beast inside. It's game on. It's go season. It's time for you to take advantage of the access and the resources that you have in your country and your community. You got a problem with your life. You got a problem with your environment. Do something about it. If you want it, go get it.
Recognize the excuses are not valid. They're conjured up, they're fabricated, they're lies. And how do you stop the lies? You stop the lies with the truth. That the truth is, you have time. You have the skill, you have the knowledge and the support and the willpower and the discipline to get it done.
The fruit of everything good in life begins with a challenge. Everything is uphill this way. And it's not going to come to you, and it's not going to fall in your lap, and it's not going to be something that, oh my God, it just was so simple. It's always going to be difficult.
If you want it, you gotta go get it.
This is your chance. This is your shot. This is your moment. This is your time. This is your place. This is your opportunity.
This is my time. This is my moment. Tomorrow. Ain't no such thing as tomorrow. We only got today. It's your dream. If you wanted to have it, get your butt up and make it happen. If you wanted to have it, rise and grind.
You still got work to do. Stay on that basketball court. Stay on that football field. It's grind season, homie.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you feel like you're benefiting from the show and want to show your support, you can support us on our Patreon page and a link in the show notes. Please like and follow us on social media and help us spread the word by reposting our posts and telling others about the show. You can leave comments on the website at www.GJJR.com. You can also go to iTunes and leave comments as well as rate the show, and we would appreciate a 5-star rating, which helps us with our standing in iTunes. You can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have suggestions for the show, please don't hesitate to give those. We always like feedback and suggestions. Okay, that's going to do it. So until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.